Let's move on to another call. We've got Nigel in Kent. Hello, Nigel.
Hello, Ian. Good evening.
Good evening. I think I recognise that voice.
Well, yes. I mean, I think maybe the panel may as well.
Gogglebox.
But it's great to see Labour discussing immigration. After all, it was their opening doors to Eastern Europe and Southern Europe that has led to wages of ordinary folk being depressed. And I wonder, given that the EU says there's nothing we can do to change open doors, are there any circumstances in which any of the panel would vote no in the referendum so that we can get back control of our borders and help the wages of working class people?
Well, for those less talented than me in spotting voices, that is, of course, the voice of Nigel Farage, the UKIP
the man
leader.
off Gogglebox from Kent, but no, that's obviously not the answer to that.
His name is Dom.
Okay.
Yvette Cooper, you're Shadow Home Secretary. Are there any circumstances you can imagine voting no in a referendum to, as Nigel puts it, sort of safeguard our borders?
If I thought it wasn't in Britain's interest, then I would vote no, but I just strongly think it is in Britain's interest. I've got a factory in my constituency, a Haribo factory, that the new management... Yeah, you should. It's very nice.
Terrible for your health.
I know.
I'm diabetic.
It's a new factory and it's going to be hundreds of jobs, and they told me they're investing because we're part of Europe, because it's going to be exporting to Ireland, to France and Spain, and they would not be thinking about doing that if we weren't part of Europe. So I think, look, that's hundreds of jobs in my constituency that depend on us being part of Europe. And so that's why I think, look, the question back to Nigel is, like, any circumstances in which you would vote yes, or you're just so ideologically blinkered and anti-Europe that you always want to just shrink our country, make us turn inwards among ourselves, make us a darker, narrower, more impoverished place.
Liz?
No. I mean, what would happen to this amazing capital city of ours if we were out of Europe? What would happen to the manufacturing jobs across the Midland? How on earth would we tackle climate change or work with other countries to tackle terrorism? We have got to make the strong and positive case for Europe. Yes, it needs reform. We all know that. But, it's great for jobs, for social protections, for tackling some of the big challenges we've got as a country. I am yes, first, last and always.
Jeremy, UKIP really are now the party of the working class, aren't they?
No.
Well, in large parts of the north they are.
Well, they're the party of despair and cynicism. Nothing Nigel Farage has ever said or will do will build a school, build a hospital, get a new teacher or anything else. All they do is complain and blame it all on a minority, whatever it happens to be. If he's worried about wages, perhaps he should support a much higher minimum wage, like the TUC call for £10 an hour, and call for really tough regulation of that minimum wage, because if there is undercutting and exploitation, then obviously that's wrong. That's why the Gangmasters Authority was brought in. I think those things are very important. He should also think about the 2 million British people that have chosen to live in other parts of Europe, happily live there and make a contribution to those societies. What kind of world does he want to live in?
Have we unwittingly stumbled on something from the 1983 manifesto that you didn't agree with? You didn't want to come out of Europe?
The 1983 manifesto said there should be a referendum on Europe.
I think it said withdrawal from Europe.
What my view on Europe at the moment is that we should be negotiating better working conditions across Europe. We should be negotiating better wage levels and social protection across Europe, because what we've got with the Maastricht Treaty, the European Central Bank, which I realise relates mainly to the Eurozone but not exclusively, is a Europe that's more dedicated to capital movement, which I would have thought Nigel Farage would be very strongly in favour of. Nigel Farage is against social protection.
Sorry? Would you ever vote for us to leave?
If Europe becomes a totally brutal organisation that treats every one of its member states in the way that the people of Greece are being treated at the moment, then I think Europe will lose a lot of support from a lot of other people.
What about next year? How would you vote next year?
We don't know what the referendum's going to be next year. We don't even know what the question is. And indeed, I don't think David Cameron even knows what the question is.
If it was just in or out, yes or no?
Just one second.
My view is that Labour should make a negotiating point now about the question of conditions.
We're not in government, Jeremy.
We are in opposition and we have a lot of support. We do have some say in the... Just because we're not a majority in Parliament does not mean we don't exist and can't do something.
Do you not think, though, that the way...
We're not in a position to negotiate with Angela Merkel,
the way the EU has behaved, or the Eurozone has behaved towards Greece, for example, do you not think that on its own is worthy of consideration of actually leaving it? It's a bit like... It is like a dictatorship. They have dictated to Greece, have they not?
We're not in the Eurozone, and I'm glad we're not. My problem is whether or not the Eurozone gets greater and greater control over Europe. We actually already have a two-stage Europe. Now, I think what I do support is a wider Europe with environmental, social protection and free movement of people.
But if the vote was tomorrow, would you vote yes or no?
I'm going to Andy Burnham now.
Yeah.
Andy,
I think
just respond to what Nigel Farage said initially about, are there any circumstances that you could consider voting no?
Well, there aren't, because I always will believe that being in Europe is better for jobs in our country. Our prosperity is bound up with being in Europe. But here's maybe a difference between me and the other candidates. I think Nigel raises an important issue that we have to address, and that is wages are undercut. Certainly it happens in my constituency and in other parts of the Midlands and the North. And if we look like we're not addressing that issue, then we aren't going to win back people who are now voting for Nigel's party, who used to vote Labour. So as part of this renegotiation, I believe we need to see legislation through Europe that protects the going rate, protects the wages of the skilled workforce, because otherwise Europe begins to look like
we already have that. It's called the minimum wage.
No, we don't. It was dropped, actually. It was a proposal a few years ago, but it never came through. The problem being that Europe begins to look like a race to the bottom. So people see their jobs undercut, their wages undercut. You can't win a referendum, or you might struggle, if people feel that Europe undercuts your position in the labour market.
Nigel Farage, you've been very restrained. I've been expecting you to interrupt. How do you react to what you've heard from our four friends here?
It's sad that the Labour Party has lost sight of democracy, something that it believed in 40 years ago in the last referendum. Labour was for, Britain governing itself, Parliament being sovereign, but that's obviously gone. But it's also very interesting that all four candidates clearly support free movement of labour, and I have to say that we have a Labour Party that now appears to be in hock to the corporates, to the big businesses that now dominate our lives and want to pay people as little as possible. And I would say, from a UKIP perspective, thank you to all four of you.
Which of these?
A complete load of rubbish.
Which of these four, Nigel, would you like to win?
Well, at least Jeremy Corbyn's a socialist, and that's what the party's supposed to be.
Well, it's good. You got Nigel's all these endorsements, Jeremy.
Is Nigel Farage the person who wants to cut rights for working people and talk about a market-based NHS? I mean, this is just a load of rubbish.
Your whole life and career has been about banking, has about been cutting working class rights and living standards.
He's never been a banker.
And you put yourself up as some kind of populist. Come on, Nigel.
I'm sorry, Jeremy. I've never worked in a bank. I'm sorry. You've got your little image. I bought and sold lead and zinc.
You bought and sold. Where did this lead come from, Nigel?
Well, it comes from all over the world, actually, and that's the point that all four should address. That our future is not as part of Europe. Our future is as a global trading economy.
I'm sure you were very concerned about the working conditions of the lead miners.
We're going to move on. Nigel, thank you for phoning in.
First of all, to Ken, who is in Luton.
Boris.
Good morning, Ken.
The thing I've been worrying about is if they're going to run the trains 24 hours at the weekends.
Yes.
When are they going to do the maintenance?